So in this series, I'm going to be taking it upon myself to make an objective review of each of the dynasties and states that have ruled over China throughout its long and rich history. The reason I'm doing this is because so much culture, innovation, and history has come out of this general area that so many people tend to sweep under the rug. Right now, we're going to be taking a look at every China that has ever Chinaed. This is China Review. Now, before I get into the Xia Dynasty, I think it's important to explain why this is our starting point. The very first Chinese cultures have been linked to various tribes that inhabited the various plains, steppes, and valleys of China proper throughout the Neolithic period. However, I will not be covering this period of Chinese history for a few reasons. The first being that there were many myriad cultures and they were never particularly homogeneous, and I just don't have the time to cover them all. The second being that they generally didn't do a whole lot that would be interesting to cover. So here's a quick rundown of what these tribes did. They made a ton of pottery and they killed each other a lot. Fun stuff. Here's where it gets interesting. According to Chinese legend, from the time period of about 2852 BC to 2070 BC, or the time directly before the founding of the Xia Dynasty, the vast majority of settled China proper was ruled in succession by a number of godly beings known as the three sovereigns and the five emperors. However, important to keep in mind is that these were not rulers or emperors like we would think of them, and their existence has ultimately never been confirmed. I like to think of them as akin to biblical figures whose existence cannot technically be confirmed, but is accepted by some people regardless. Another thing to keep in mind is that these rulers were only written about retrospectively and never contemporaneously. The earliest known reference to this period of Chinese history was recorded by the historian Sima Qian in 94 BC, about 2,500 years after the supposed reign of Wang Di, one of the five emperors. Now, prior to the Xia Dynasty, emperors reigned based on merit, and were seen as those best fit to rule. According to legend, this would change when a man named Yu the Great came along. Now that's not me giving you a compliment. His name was actually Yu the Great. Sometime in the 3rd millennium BC, the Yellow and Yangtze rivers both flooded over, spelling disaster for the reigning emperor at the time, Yao, and his people. Yao hires a guy called Gun of Chong, a relative of his and the father of Yu, to stop the flood with his construction projects like dams and trenches. Gun tries for years to stop the floods, but they only get worse with time, and so Gun gets exiled and executed. Yao resigns his throne to the new emperor, Shun, who hires our boy Yu the Great to fix his father's mess. Yu plans his constructions more thoroughly, blocking off all the major rivers, and actually manages to hold back the floodwaters. Prosperity thus returned to China, and Yu became a popular hero. Shun would later give the throne to Yu, ending the reign of the emperors and beginning dynastic rule in China, as Yu would later relinquish the throne to his son Qi. Mythically, the aforementioned time period is also seen as the period whereby agriculture, fire-making, and other important staples were introduced to China. This Xia dynasty would end around 500 years later with the king Qi, who is typically regarded as a despotic and morally bankrupt king who lavishly spent his empire's riches for his own luxuries while oppressing the people under his rule. Resistance to Qi's reign began in the smaller kingdoms over which the Xia held suzerainty over, and the Shang kingdom led by the general Tang of Shang would eventually come to usurp the Xia through conquest and alliance with other kingdoms, culminating in the Battle of Mingqiao, during which Tang's coalition would fiercely fight in resentment of Qi, while the Xia forces ultimately decided that fighting was no longer worth it, effectively ending the ruling dynasty and giving the Shang dynasty free reign over China. If I'm going to be honest, I don't feel very compelled to make a review for the Xia dynasty under the pretense that almost all of it is shrouded in folk legend. It's like trying to objectively look at the story of Noah's Ark or some other creation myth for the reason that it's ultimately the creation myth for the Chinese state and culture. So as disappointing as it may be, I'm going to be holding off until there exists empirical evidence for the accomplishments of these dynasts before I make an earnest review. That being said, I'll see you all on the next episode of China Review, where we'll tackle Mr. Tang and his new Shang dynasty. Will he be any better than the corrupt and tyrannical Qi? We can only wait and see.